boat ride, a charcha over chai, a stroll in the park. Unlikely settings to discuss issues that drive countries to war. But that's exactly what happened here in Wuhan when the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, met with the President of China, Xi Jinping, for 6 times in less than 24 hours. For those who expected big ticket announcements at the end of the Wuhan summit, the announcements were a bit underwhelming. But for those who understand how diplomacy works, this was a big success. And the key headlines, the big takeaways from this meeting were these. China is not going to push India to join the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, not that it could have, but to acknowledge and understand the other's exigencies is very important in confidence building. The second is that China and India will join hands for a project in Afghanistan, and that's huge. We do not know what the contours of this project will be just yet, but we know the announcement, the very suggestion is very, very significant. It will have immense implications, not just for that country, but also for Pakistan and the US. So when we say that this meeting marks the beginning of a new global order, we are not exaggerating. And we'll talk about all of that in detail over the next 30 minutes. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay, bringing you a very special edition of Gravitas on a weekend in Wuhan in central China. This is where we are coming to you live from. And we will talk about what happened here at the East Lake. But first, 2 leaders, 2 days, 6 meetings. This and some defining images sums up the Prime Minister's Wuhan visit. He met with President Xi Jinping. They bonded over breakfast, over lunch and dinner. And our top story tonight brings you the best moments.
A beautiful rendition of a Bollywood classic was perhaps the best way to make the Indian Prime Minister feel at home. The 2-day informal summit was an excellent opportunity for both the leaders to establish a rapport. Wuhan put its best foot forward as a host to the Indian Prime Minister. Prime Minister Modi received a red carpet welcome at a museum on the first day of his visit, where he tried his hands on a set of ancient chimes after a cultural performance. On the second day, both leaders took a walk together along the East Lake. They were accompanied by their translators. Officials and diplomats from both sides stayed away. The leaders also had a tea tasting session. Prime Minister Modi held one of his last rounds of talks with the Chinese president on an hour-long boat ride around East Lake. Many experts cannot help but compare the Wuhan dialogue with President Xi Jinping's visit to India in 2014, where the Chinese leader got a taste of Indian hospitality and culture. Hopefully, the warmth from the informal summit will trickle down to diplomatic engagements between both sides. Bureau Report, WION.
In June last year, troops from India and China engaged in one of the most bitter confrontations along the border. The setting was Doklam. The problem, the sticking point, was the fact that the Chinese wanted to build a road on a tri-junction, the area that India said belonged to Bhutan. And that is when the confrontation began. It stretched on for more than 2 months. So when the 2 leaders of India and China, Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping, sat down to talk today, the border issue did, of course, come up. Both sides have agreed to maintain peace. Both sides have agreed to keep talking to ensure that such a situation does not arise. But what does it really mean? Our next report explains that.
India and China share a border that is more than 3,000 kilometers long, one of the longest land boundaries in the world and one that is witness to regular confrontation. Naturally, when the leaders of the two nations met in the Chinese city of Wuhan, the issue of border security came up for discussion. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Xi Jinping signalled willingness to work towards resolving territorial disputes, or at least preventing them from flaring up.
The two leaders underscored the importance of maintaining peace and tranquility in the India-China border regions. They decided that they will strengthen communication between the two militaries in order to build trust and understanding, that a number of confidence-building measures already agreed upon the two sides will be implemented, and the information sharing arrangements will be improved to prevent and manage situations along the border areas.
Even though there was no mention of the Doklam standoff in the Indian Foreign Secretary's press briefing, the visit is being seen from the prism of last year's standoff, one of the most fierce between the armies of the two nations. The face-off between India and China's militaries played out over a stretch of their high-altitude Himalayan border in Doklam. It was sparked by the People's Liberation Army choosing to construct a road in the region. India stepped in to stop the construction, leading to a 73-day-long standoff. This was just one dispute. The two armies have often sparred over the Aksai Chin, an uninhabitable desert expanse that China claims as its own. The 37,000 square kilometer wide stretch is a crucial link between China and its restive regions of Tibet and Xinjiang. It's been in the eye of the storm since the 1950s, when China started building a strategic highway in the then unguarded region. The other flashpoint has been the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh. China claims that it does not recognize the region as Indian territory and has made repeated claims to it. The border issues have proved long-standing bones of contention. The summit in Wuhan between the leaders of both countries no less has generated hope that future engagement, contentious as it gets, is constructive and not immediately aggressive. Bureau Report, WION.
The second big issue at hand was the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative. From India's point of view, it is an affront to India's sovereignty. There is going to be no softening of India's position. But amid reports that the BRI is going to be stretched to Afghanistan, the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is a part of the BRI, will go via Afghanistan. What are India's options?
3 days before the Modi-Xi summit in Wuhan, External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj, also in China for the meeting of SCO foreign ministers, refused to endorse the Belt and Road Initiative. Swaraj's name was missing from the joint statement issued by the SCO foreign ministers welcoming BRI. India's opposition to what is seen as a signature Xi Jinping initiative has evoked hostility in Beijing. Xi may well have sought Modi's views on BRI in an effort to gauge the basis of India's opposition. None would deny that the BRI is an ambitious and visionary trillion-dollar effort to build new infrastructure across Asia, boost trade and investment. India's problem is it passes through Pak-occupied Kashmir. India suspects it is a smokescreen for China to dominate Asia. It's unclear if BRI projects are sustainable or environmentally viable. BRI projects are funded and planned by China for Chinese firms. The latest buzz centers around the Pakistan leg of BRI, called the China-Pak Economic Corridor, being extended to Afghanistan. Is this intended to soften India's opposition? Does this make BRI more viable? Doubtful given the conflict raging in Afghanistan, which makes any investment unlikely. Neither China nor India have been able to capitalize on copper and iron ore mining concessions awarded by the Afghan government quite some years ago. Nevertheless, BRI will move forward, but its momentum may have already slowed as more and more countries question the economic rationale behind it. Bureau Report, WION.
When we talk about India and China, we cannot not mention the fact that these two are economic powerhouses, not just of Asia, but the world, the fastest growing economies in the world. So it is understandable that when their leaders meet, they talk about trade and investment, and that is what Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping also did. What came out of those talks? This is what we know.
In recent times, trade has become a major bone of contention in international affairs. China is a key player in the global trade dispute, especially after the United States launched a trade war against Chinese goods. The times are changing and China is now looking for a shield for its economy, which is why people were not surprised when trade also came up for discussion during an informal dialogue between leaders of India and China.
Bilateral trade and investment formed an important part of the discussion. The two leaders underlined that trade should be balanced, it should be sustainable, and that we should take advantage of the complementarities between the two economies to enhance our trade and investment.
China's trade relationship with the United States may hit a wall, but this opens up an exciting opportunity for India and China. Beijing remains India's largest source for imports. It is also the third largest export destination for India. But the trade deficit between India and China stands at more than $50 billion. Indian businesses are keen on getting greater access to Chinese markets. In March this year, India was able to convince China for better markets access for Indian farmer products apart from agriculture commodities. As the rise of protectionism continues in the West, India and China have a rare opportunity to join hands and dictate terms for global trade. The possibilities are endless. Both countries have a large and young population. India and China are the fastest growing economies and among the world's biggest markets. The changing tunes of the West against globalization gives India and China an opportunity to put border disputes behind them and come together to protect their business interests. In a rapidly changing global scenario, India and China's fate remains intertwined, and this should enable diplomats on both sides to enable a reset in ties. Bureau Report, WION.
When India and China talk about reset, the world watches. The world was watching this meeting as well, very closely. For some, it was a historic meet. For others, it was a storm in a teacup. How did the global media, how did leaders across the world react to this meeting of Xi Jinping and Narendra Modi? This report sums it up.
The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's meeting with China's leader Xi Jinping has been hailed as a new chapter in India-China ties. Sketches depicting the meeting between the two Asian giants were splashed across the front pages of leading Chinese dailies. An opinion piece in Xinhua has called the tete-a-tete a sign of closer economic and diplomatic cooperation between the two countries. It's expected to create a more balanced relationship in how countries trade in the world for mutual benefit. The China Daily has said that the heart-to-heart communication between the two leaders reflected their deepened mutual chemistry. The Global Times, which is the mouthpiece of the Chinese government, has emphasized on the need for such meets, saying that the recent conflicts which exposed the fragility of relations between India and China has prompted both sides to recognize that confrontation does not suit their interests. While the global media has called the summit the most important meeting in Asia, calling Prime Minister Modi's visit to China an ice-breaking trip. The extensive reportage does attach great significance to the Wuhan summit. And if pictures could speak, these definitely tell of a warmth in ties between India and China. Bureau Report, WION.
With that, it's a wrap on this very special edition of Gravitas. Coming to you live from Wuhan in central China. We're leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching.